Hello, this is Philip Nikolayev. My guest today is Marc Vincenz. It's a Romansh name. Marc is from Switzerland, and his last name is spelled Vincenz. We're here to talk about Marc's most recent collection of poems, Gods of a Ransacked Century. Gods of a Ransacked Century was published by Unlikely Books this year, and you can find the press and the book at www.unlikelystories.org. www.unlikelystories.org. We will be discussing Gods of a Ransacked Century by Marc Vincenz. Hi, Marc. So, my intention today is to talk about some of your poems in some detail, perhaps to a greater extent than is usually done in poetry interviews. What impels me to do this, or at least to attempt to do this, is something that happened at this reading that we gave together the other day at the Grolier Poetry Shop, where one of the listeners, a lady, approached you after the reading and said that she really enjoyed the music of your verse or something, listening, hearing your poems, the sounds of your poems, but could not make out what you meant in them, couldn't understand too much of them. Is this something that you get rather often? And do your readers ever ask you what your poems mean? How do you feel about explaining your work in general? Shall we discuss some poems so as to provide perhaps an entry point into your style?
Sure, why not, Philip? That sounds like a good idea. I mean, I can say a few words on those subjects, if you'd like. I have a number of styles of writing, I should say, or a number of voices. Another book of mine that's coming out later this year, Mao's Mole, is predominantly narrative and fairly straightforward. I think anyone can get the general meaning. There are some subtleties about Chinese culture and so on in there, but other than that, it's fairly straightforward narrative. So when I read those kind of poems, I don't really get the question, what on earth did you mean by that? When I read Gods of Ransacked Century or some of my newer work, I have had that a couple of times for sure. But I'm not always sure also what the faces in the audience sometimes mean, whether it's sunk through or not. But maybe shall I read the poem first, or?
Well, would you? Yes, if you could perhaps start with the opening poem of the collection, This Afternoon's Year. Would you read that, please?
Okay. This afternoon's year, billionth of a second flurry of non-dimension, tachyon time becoming curve, sludge becoming wave, skin becoming flatline, crackle of twin molecule chains, clenching layer upon layer, grasping, slipping into one another, destined to become something other. That's the poem.
Well, it's an excellent poem in my view, and I have some ideas of my own about what it might mean, even though, of course, not being you, I can't guarantee that they reflect your original intention. Shall I volunteer some of these guesses, and then you can tell me if I'm right? It seems to me that these poems are quite accessible, and I've also seen other remarks about your work, claiming that there is some accessibility, the potential accessibility issues with it. It's not a point of view that I share myself. I will try to demonstrate here in how this poem in particular makes reasonably clear sense to me. I will then ask you if my reading of it is somehow resonates with your own. So it seems to me that the striking thing to notice about it is that it's composed of these stretches of thoughts, little segments of thought that evolve, creating a kind of a wonderful pattern, one that is wonderful in its economy. It seems to me that it starts with a discussion, that's too heavy a word, with with a reference to physics, to the physical universe, to something like the Big Bang, billionth of a second flurry of non-dimension. So this was a long time ago, before the world emerged, and then, or rather, at the moment that it emerged via what scientists have described for us as the Big Bang, this great explosion of matter. Tachyon time becoming curve, sludge becoming wave. So this universe is evolving. We have a hint here at perhaps at the Heisenbergian uncertainty principle, which is the foundation of thermodynamic.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Then the vision evolves further, and this is all like these segments occur in what could perhaps be even a single sentence. The poem is so short, so compact. Skin becoming flat line. So we have skin now. We have some kind of birth, some kind of life is emerging. Crackle of twin molecule chains, clenching layer upon layer. So these twin molecule chains, they make me think of DNA, of the double helix. So really we're talking about life here. Grasping, slipping into one another, procreating somehow, destined to become something other. So this becoming something other, which is the continuous kind of telos of evolution, or its underlying principle, eventually leads us to the subject in the given moment. It's a poem that starts before time itself began and ends with the present day. Its period, its cycle is the closest thing we can think of to eternity that is actually given to us in some kind of scientific perception of how the world has evolved. Starting from scratch, really, from pre-reality, and ending with this afternoon, this cigarette, this cup of coffee here. So this afternoon's year, as I understand it, the year here is this really giant cycle of time, or a metaphor for that, rather. And this illustrates the wonderful power of poetry, doesn't it? That unlike other genres, verbal genres, in my opinion, poetry can squeeze the most into the shortest space, the most compact space. Mandelstam has this idea of speed in poetry, that poetry is this kind of speed, that it travels much faster than fiction, for example. It can tell a whole story, a whole novel in just a few lines. This is my take on this poem. And though I have not discussed this with you, I viscerally feel fairly certain that somehow this is what it's about. I wonder if we're on the same page here. Could you comment, please?
Well, thank you very much for your detailed thoughts on that poem, Philip. Honestly speaking, I think I should ask you to write a book of criticism because you almost figured it out better than I figured it out myself. But yes, absolutely, it is exactly as you have described it. It is about the beginning of everything, and now. The moment is the beginning of everything, and now. And yeah, it's curious to me that people have this impression that some of my work is hard to understand or hard to grasp. I try my best to strip down the language to really give a completely visceral image of the object or the non-object that I am attempting to describe. In this case, obviously, more of a non-object, but a fleeting moment. And yes, absolutely, you completely got it all the way down to a T.
That's good to know. My critical acumen is not yet there. About writing a book of criticism, I don't know, my friend. I don't know. Poetry requires my primary focus at the moment, I suppose, and that's hard enough. No time for criticism. Could you comment on the book's title, "Gods of the Rank of a Ransacked Century"? Is that right? Yes.
No.
What's with the gods in it, for example?
Well, the book basically has three gods who make the beginning of the chapters, actually. The first god is a she who lives at the dead center, plunging. The second god is he whose transparency is an odd form. The third god is his never-tiring monkey antics, skin deep. Well, first of all, I think you can see that this progression of the names of the gods is even a consideration in terms of the poetry of the book within itself, but also of the ever-present creator symbol, which basically is an iconic logo or symbol that today might be a Nike swish or a Coca-Cola can symbol. So what are the gods of a ransacked century? A ransacked century is a century that has been completely and utterly robbed of anything of substance. The gods preside over it through the evolution of man. Are these three gods, who might as well be called Buddha or Siddhartha, or well, I'm not going to mention the Christian one, but I think you know who I mean. Let me pass it back to you for a second, Philip.
Well, all right. So, would you please read the first of these three poems, "She who lives at the dead center, plunging"?
She who lives at the dead center, plunging into a pool of moonlight. Oh, how easily one swims through silence, but to find a mantra, voice within voice, falls unsettled upon the hot tongue. Snow against glass, a speckling of cosmic matter resting no more than a breath.
So this leads me to my next question. Do these gods represent things in the world, things external to the subject, or things within us, within you as the poet? I see that such readings of these poems, they seem eminently possible to me at the very rate. I wouldn't be too certain in insisting on them. But what do you say?
I'm very much a fan of ambiguity, and I really try and restrain myself from explaining my own work. But for me, these gods are within, without, and also objects. All three, I would say, representing, shall we say, the modern Trinity. That's the way I see it.
I see. Would you read the second of them, please?
Yeah, I'm just turning to the page. Okay. He whose transparency is an odd form, made to measure in man's rise, to loom in impermeable gloss, a wish to last close to eternity, a moonwalk, redirecting the picture imperfect. The failed words falling back into the eyes of time, and besieged surface upon surface, glaring ahead into a ransacked century.
So here we see that the metaphor of the ransacked century in the title actually comes from this poem. I wonder, in the title or in the opening line of this poem, you have "He whose transparency is an odd form." Is this a statement of poetics, of a poetics of a style of yours? Is it intended like this? Is this a response to questions about the transparency of or the accessibility of your own poems? And is the answer that it's that odd form, the odd compositional form is the... Well, I don't know. I don't want to unpack it. I just want to hear what you say.
Coming back to my ambiguous sense. Yeah, I would say basically all of the above. Anything that you can read into it, whatever that God represents for you, whether good or evil, is really the decision that I leave to the reader.
Fair enough. And the third of the gods is he who, his never tiring monkey antics skin deep. That's the title. His never tiring monkey antics skin deep. Would you please read that poem?
His never tiring monkey antics skin deep. In the internet's otherworldliness, in the television's hammer and scythe, the inner eye for the hearing impaired, word walls for the legally blind, then that traffic of adolescents elbowing the elderly, that walking toward color-coded legend, suggestive formula that seems like a mantra, oh, but isn't.
What is interesting to me about this poem and others like it is that there's, in some of them I see at least, I see that there's a certain turn that happens, a turn of the discourse or of the narrative, however we might put it. Often it can be a turn from the external to the internal, or from associations or metaphors that seem to be about things of the external world, and then suddenly the poem kind of implodes or turns inward toward the subject, becomes sort of essentially, this humanizes the poem. It turns, as in the first example that I discussed, from a poem about maybe the physics of the world, something as cold and impersonal as that, to a poem about life and evolution. And it seems to me that in this poem, which is mythological or allegorical in its essence, suddenly we have a specific concrete observation where it says that traffic of adolescents elbowing the elderly, that walking toward color-coded legend, a suggestive formula that seems like a mantra, oh but isn't, and that this awareness of someone of a certain age who has lived a full life and has experienced the world and knows the ways of the world, this awareness that this is what adolescents do. They're clueless, and they have sharp elbows, and they rush on with great uncertainty toward color-coded things that they think are meaningful, that may end up in the long run not being very meaningful, but we only know this from the height of our experience, of our age, of our hard-earned wisdom, and so on. So it takes having been such an adolescence, and then having been elbowed by such adolescence, it takes all that to be able, for a poet to be able to, observe something like that about the world. I think those lines are very fresh and vibrant. In this, I see an example of sort of breaking away from, or through the mythological, through the allegorical, towards something concrete and still. This is something for me that anchors the poems of the world. This is somehow important, that they don't completely fly away into language, into associations. Even oftentimes they perhaps try self-consciously to hover at the edges of our linguistic experiences, right? We do try to make language as fresh as possible, as striking as possible, as our inspirations will allow us. Thank you very much for these. I would like to remind the listener again that I'm talking to Marc Vincenz, that the title of his book is Gods of a Ransacked Century, published by Unlikely Books in 2013, and it can be found at unlikelystories.org on the web.